What stays and what can you take with you when you sell your house? Well, that's what we're discussing next. Join me. Hi, my name's Peggy Durstoff and welcome back to my channel. I'm a realtor with HomeSmart here in the Denver metro area of Colorado, and I specialize in suburban living. You know, if you ask any realtor, they'll tell you some really funny stories or strange stories about what sellers take when they vacate a property. I remember, walking through a house years ago where the seller had not only taken all the knobs and all the light fixtures, but also tried to take the kitchen sink. And I've heard stories about missing doorknobs, missing toilet paper rolls, and these things can go beyond merely annoying to the buyer. If you take something that you haven't agreed upon in the contract, it could tank the sale or even cause a lawsuit. Now, first rule of thumb, if it's nailed, mounted, bolted down, or even planted in the yard, it stays with the property. And most buyers understand the word fixtures. These are immovable objects in the home, such as built-in appliances, sheds, fencing, which they know won't be going anywhere in the sale of a home. It would stay with the property. However, there's still some confusion. One of the biggest gray areas I think I've seen has to do with the mounting mechanisms for flat screen TVs. The flat screen TV is a personal property. So unless the TV is staying with the property, common sense would dictate that not only would the TV go, but also the mounting mechanism for that specific TV would also be going with the seller. But this can become a real point of contention between the buyer and the seller, especially if it's not referenced specifically in the contract to buy. In a more general sense, however, if the home has been modified for an item, it's usually considered a fixture. What comes to mind is the window air conditioning units. Now, if you have it in the window, usually the window air conditioning units are then considered personal property and they leave with the seller. However, if you've created a hole in the wall where that unit then goes, and if you were to take it out, the hole in the wall would remain, therefore then it would be considered a fixture and it would stay with the property. Realistically, the more specific you are when it comes to selling your property, so as you go through the home with your realtor, that you're listing out what you want to stay and what you're going to be taking with you. And the same if you're on the buy side, your realtor's making it very clear what you, the buyer, want to stay with the property and what you're considering what's called an exclusion, which means it's not going to stay with the property. So the more specific you are when it comes to selling your home, the better. Just because you had an area rug cut to fit a specific room doesn't mean it automatically would go with the buyer. However, if the buyer requests it, now you have the opportunity to negotiate that and see if you want to leave it with the property or if you want to consider it an exclusion and take it with you. Removing landscaping from the front or backyard or plants that you've toiled over is usually a big no-no unless it's specifically written into the contract to buy. And this brings to mind, I've had several clients who have had plants that they've planted in each home that they've owned that have gone back literally generations because it came from a grandmother. And so in the contract, you'd want to reference that and say, we're going to leave some, but we're also taking X amount of bulbs of this type of plant, or we're taking the rose bush, which has special meaning. And ideally, as a seller, if you could put something in its place, that usually makes things a whole lot easier for everybody. But definitely make sure that you're mentioning it in your agreement so nobody's surprised when they walk out back and they thought they were getting a rose bush and it's now gone. In-ground lighting for landscaping would stay. Sconces that you have on the wall in the hallway might stay if they're attached. And the big one that I always run into is the chandelier. I can't tell you how many times I've run into a chandelier that has meaning to the family. that it's either been passed down through generations or it's a very special one. Like recently I had one that was an antler chandelier that the seller loved. Ideally, the best way to handle that is simply to remove that kind of stuff before you ever have the photographs taken, before you open up the home for showings, and then either put something more neutral in its place or cover the hole with a plate. Another one that comes to mind was a bathroom mirror. Now, mirrors that are hung like pictures are usually considered personal property, but if it's bolted and glued to the wall, it's considered a fixture and should stay with the property. Window treatments is another biggie. Okay, window treatments include things like blinds, shutters, rods, curtain rods, anything that's attached to the property. Now, if it can slide off the rod, such as you have lovely curtains that match a bed set, well then those would be considered an exclusion, and you'd want to list that those are going to go with you. However, if these are custom window drapes that you ordered specifically for these windows in this house, those would most likely stay. Realtors agree that when you buy a property, as you're walking through it, the buyer sees stuff. They're seeing the whole of the house. They're not seeing it without some of these things. So the more you can prepare before you ever go on the market, the better it is for all parties. Because nobody wants to walk into the house the day before closing and see that you've taken the chandelier and left wires hanging. Bottom line is, as a realtor, I roll my eyes sometimes when I hear these stories, because we all know that it's the littlest things that sometimes can cause the most heated debates between the buyer and the seller. So the more specific you can be, the clearer you can be in your purchase agreement, the better off you will be. And most importantly, you'll avoid a potential lawsuit. If you enjoyed watching this video, go ahead and check out this one over here where I talk about whether or not to do an inspection and appraisal in this market when you're buying a home. Thank you so much for watching. In the meantime, I will look forward to seeing you next week.